Exactly. So how would you really decipher these numbers? How would you sort of go in here and see how the opposition has done and how these numbers really speak for the opposition here?
Well, my discipline is political science, it's not medical science, but if it were medical science, I'd look at this scan and say, look, this is a terminal crisis unless you have surgery now. Rush the patient in, get this cancer out. Why do I say this? Look at the numbers. Douglas Devananda got 18%, as you mentioned. The UNP got 25%. So the UNP, which was once the largest, biggest party in the country, which got 43% under Srimati Sanayaka 2 days after her husband had been killed, a couple of days after her husband had been killed, contesting in 1994, after 17 years, it got 43%. Now, it is down to 25%. The 40 plus, which was the base vote of the UNP, is now the gap between the UNP and the government, between the 20 plus and the 60 plus. And as I said, it's just 7% above Douglas Devananda's drastic defeat in the north. I mean, how much worse can you get? Well, you can get worse. General Fonseca's Democratic Party has done impressively. I mean, of course, there's a huge gap between it and the government.
But, I mean, they contested for the first time.
For the first time, no big names on the list. General Fonseca himself doesn't have his civic rights fully restored.
But he did say that it has become the third force.
But it looks like it. Third factor, I don't know, third force, whatever, but it's third. And it's catching up. You look at the government's figures, the government has got more votes in some overall, I mean, the NWP certainly. The UNP has collapsed in Nuwara Eliya. It's lost the Kurunegala district and the Kandy district. So it's in a downward spiral. The government is in crisis externally, but the government's crisis is kind of parabolic. I mean, it's like a Titanic moving slowly towards the iceberg. But the UNP's is like a plane with 3 or 4 engines on fire, which is corkscrewing, and it's about to hit. The facts, the statistics tell the story. Now, if General Fonseca's party puts forward Anuma Fonseca as chief ministerial candidate in the Western Province in a few months, then it's going to do a lot better than the 5 to 6% it got. It'll head towards 10, maybe more. And where will that come from? It'll come from the UNP or from those who might have voted for the UNP. And you will see at the next round of provincial council elections a virtual bifurcation of the UNP's vote. The UNP couldn't retain Dasari Jayasekara, but Dasari Jayasekara proved just how successful and popular a politician
he
and
got
how
the
great.
Highest number of preferential votes in the entire provincial council election.
Higher than Chandrika.
It's a historic, it was a historic number.
Percentage wise, Vigneshwaran got more. But Dasari, and Dasari proved that the people of this country don't necessarily and almost never vote simply for the guy who's connected to the palace or whatever. They vote for the best candidate available.
And he joined the government just 3 months or so.
The people in the north voted for Vigneshwaran, and the people in Vamba voted for Dasari. I mean, people, if they're given an alternative, they make the right choice. It's only when they don't have an alternative that they stick with the same old, the status quo. So, what's going to happen at a parliamentary election or presidential election? At a parliamentary election, you plot the average, the figures. The UNP will move from its 43 MPs perhaps to 25. Of those, 5 will defect on the morning after to the government. At a presidential election, even to get this 25% Mahina in the 2 provincial councils, the candidates and their families and their entourages worked. Please tell me, who is going to work for Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe if he is the presidential candidate? Who in the UNP? I mean, apart from a few guys who can't get 2,000 people to demonstrate, after Valley area. Nobody. There's not going to be a ground game, as the Americans put it. Who's there to wage the ground game for the UNP if Mr. Wickremesinghe remains a leader and still worse, the candidate? We're talking about the self-destruction as we speak. It used to be slow motion, it is not even slow motion anymore. It's an accelerated decay and self-destruction of the UNP. If it is to survive and revive, it simply has to replace its leader before this year is out.
We see UNP parliamentarians speaking after the election saying, yes, it was, we see a loss. However, we need to engage in self-criticism. We need to reorganize the party. Do you agree with these sentiments?
I mean,
we see the words restructure, reform, reorganize the party. Is that the way of going about?
I mean, this is beating about the bush. It's clearly a question of the unpopularity of the leader. I mean, he's the only thing that's been there in common throughout the decline of the UNP. Everything else has changed in this country. We've had we have had 2 terms of Chandrika Kumaratunga. Now we have Mahinda Rajapaksa. So we had Prabhakaran, and now he's dead. We had the Tigers; they're gone. We didn't have a Northern Provincial Council. Now we have one. We didn't have a harbour in Hambantota, we have one. Two things, that have not changed is we've got Ranil Wickremesinghe as the leader of the opposition, and the second thing is the opposition has kept losing. I mean, those are the only 2 constant factors in an ever-changing world, things you can count on. So there's no point in talking about restructuring. It's not restructuring, it's just changing the leadership. I mean, if you're swimming with a ball and chain tied to your ankle, there's no point in wrapping the ball and chain around your neck or something. I mean, you just have to remove it. If you're dying of a cancer, I mean, if something is killing you, you have to remove it. If somebody has a raging contagion, you don't have a leadership council where other people get the same thing. I read that somebody wants Karu to contest as chief minister in the Western province and Sajid to contest in the Southern province. Look, even if the famous statue of Mr. D.S. Saranayaka were to come alive and be part of the UNP leadership, so long as Ranil is the leader, the party is going to lose. So what they're doing with this formula is they're giving a cyanide capsule, one to Karu, one to Sajid, and saying, bite on it at the next provincial council election. So what that does is it makes sure that there's nobody in the UNP retaining their parliamentary seats who can revive the UNP and therefore the opposition and therefore revive democracy and good governance simply by being an effective competitor of the government. And as I said, the North shows that if you have an effective opposition, a smart opposition, where they had Sambandhan, Sumandaran, Vigneshwaran, Suresh, I mean, it's a smart working opposition. And they won big. Look at Dasari, he came from the outside. He beat City Hall, he beat the establishment from within. It can be done. But it cannot be done by all these, reshuffle, restructure, reorganize, self-criticism. I mean, this is all a sad waste of time.
In the UNP, we see people like Karu Jayasuriya, we see Sajid Premadas as well, who have, for example, Sajid Premadas in Hambantota, we saw how he really proved to the UNP that he could get a lot of votes for them. And going in for the upcoming elections, now the government has said that there's going to be elections for the Western province, for the Southern province. These are all areas where the UNP could still have a footing. So how could the UNP use individuals such as these, such as Sajid Premadasa and Karu Jayasuriya, to steer the party at least onto the winning path?
Well, Mahina, they can't do it by putting them as chief ministerial candidates, because the problem that the electorate has is not at the provincial level. The UNP has lost every election at every level. So then the problem is not at the provincial level, it's at the national level. People are leaving in droves. Why did Dasari Jayasuriya leave? It was because of Ranil. And many of these guys who've gone will come back if there's a change of leadership. Now, Karu Jayasuriya proved that he could take on the Bandaranayakas at that time in their home turf, that is Gampaha. And he won, he did well.